My name is Emily, I'm 53, and my own family forged my signature to steal my inheritance and branded me a homeless veteran in court. Before I tell you how one piece of paper got them arrested right there in the courtroom, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The drive home is supposed to be a moment of quiet triumph. After 25 years of serving my country in the Army, of rising through the ranks to Lieutenant Colonel in the nascent world of Cyber Command, I was finally done. No more deployments to dusty, sun-scorched landscapes. No more sterile data centers humming with the sound of 1,000 servers. I was driving home, back to the small Pennsylvania town where I was raised, back to the house my grandfather had built with his own 2 hands. As I took the familiar exit off the highway, a sense of peace settled over me for the first time in years. The rolling green hills, the oak trees just beginning to turn for autumn, the scent of rain in the air, it was all exactly as I remembered. This was my reward. This was the finish line. I pulled into the driveway of the old colonial-style house, a smile on my face. It stood proud, just as it always had. I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat and walked up the stone path, fishing my grandfather's old brass key from my pocket. It had been my good luck charm, a tangible link to home that I'd carried through every mission. I slid the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. Frowning, I tried again, jiggling it. Nothing. The lock felt solid, unmoving. Odd. Maybe it had just gotten old and rusted. I knocked, a firm, familiar rap. I heard footsteps inside, not the slow, deliberate tread of my mother, but a quicker, almost skittish sound. The door opened, but only a few inches, stopped by the brass safety chain. My younger sister, Vanessa, peered through the gap. Her eyes, which should have been filled with a welcome home warmth, widened with something else entirely. Panic. Emily? What on earth are you doing here? Her voice was a sharp, accusatory whisper. The question threw me. I'm home, Van, I said, my smile faltering. My service is done. I sent you the dates weeks ago. Remember? Oh. Right. She glanced over her shoulder, back into the house. Well, look, this isn't a good time. We're busy. She began to push the door closed. An instinct, honed by years of threat assessment, screamed that something was wrong. I planted my hand flat against the heavy oak door. Not a good time? This is my house, Vanessa. Grandpa's will was crystal clear. He left his entire inheritance to me. Her face, which had been pale with panic, flushed with a sudden, ugly anger. You were never here, Emily. You were off playing soldier while I was the one here, looking after Mom and Dad, dealing with the funeral arrangements, everything. This house needed work. It needed someone to actually live in it. I was serving my country, Van. That's a little different than playing soldier. And I sent money home every month. A little money doesn't make up for being gone for 2 decades, she spat. You need to leave. Now. Or I'm calling the police. The words hit me like a physical blow. The police? You're going to call the police on your own sister? You are trespassing, she said, her voice dripping with venom. The door slammed shut. I heard the chain rattle, then the deadbolt sliding home with a sickening finality. I stood there on the porch, stunned into silence. The key in my hand felt useless, a relic from a life that apparently no longer existed. Was this a joke? A horribly misguided prank? But the look in her eyes had been real. The hatred had been real. True to her word, less than 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up the driveway. 2 officers emerged, a younger one who looked barely out of his 20s and an older, weary-looking sergeant. Ma'am, we received a call about a disturbance, the sergeant said, his hand resting near his sidearm. My training kicked in. Stay calm. Be clear. Explain the facts. Officer, there's no disturbance. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Emily Harrington. This is my house, left to me by my late grandfather. My sister, who is currently inside, is refusing me entry. I showed them my military ID, the photo of a younger me in uniform staring back at them. The younger officer looked at the ID, then at the house, then back at me, a flicker of respect in his eyes. But the sergeant just sighed, a long, tired sound. "Can you wait here for a moment, ma'am?" He went to the door and spoke with Vanessa. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her hand him a sheaf of papers through the crack in the door. He read them, his expression unreadable. After a minute, he walked back to me, handing the papers back to my sister first. "Ma'am," he said, his tone now firm and official. "I've seen the current deed to this property. It was legally transferred a few months ago to a holding company. According to this paperwork, you do not have a legal right to be here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." "A holding company?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "That's impossible. I never signed anything. That document has to be a forgery." "That may be," the sergeant said, his voice softening slightly. "But that's a civil matter. It's for a court and a lawyer to decide. Right now, on paper, you're on property that doesn't belong to you. Please, don't make me escalate this." There it was. The cold, hard wall of bureaucracy. I, a woman who had commanded soldiers and secured sensitive national assets, was being told I was a trespasser on my own front porch. The officers watched as I walked back to my car, the humiliation a hot flush crawling up my neck. From the living room window, I could see Vanessa's silhouette, watching me go. That night, in a roadside motel that smelled of disinfectant and regret, the full weight of the betrayal crashed down on me. My family. My own blood. They had conspired to steal the one place on earth I considered my sanctuary. For an hour, I let myself feel it all, the grief, the rage, the profound loneliness. I felt like a soldier without a country, a daughter without a family. And then, I stopped. The military teaches you many things. It teaches you discipline. It teaches you strategy. And most of all, it teaches you that when you are ambushed, you don't panic. You dig in, you assess the battlefield, and you plan your counteroffensive. My first call was at 7 a.m. the next morning, to Sarah Clay. We'd been college roommates, and while I'd gone into the military, she'd gone to law school and become one of Philadelphia's most tenacious attorneys. "They did what?" She shrieked into the phone, her voice a mix of disbelief and fury. That's not just a civil issue, that's criminal. Forgery, fraud, it's a felony." "I know," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But I need proof." "The police saw a deed, Sarah. They said it looked legal." "Legal doesn't mean legitimate," she shot back. "Send me a copy of your grandfather's will. Send me everything you can think of. We're going to pull on this thread until their whole rotten sweater unravels." After we hung up, I leaned back on the stiff motel pillow and closed my eyes. I pictured my grandfather in his workshop, the smell of sawdust and varnish in the air. He was showing me how to join two pieces of wood, his gnarled hands moving with a practiced grace. "A strong bond, Emily," he'd said. "It's all about the foundation. This house has a solid foundation. Just like you. Never forget that." His memory wasn't just a comfort, it was a command. My foundation was solid. Now it was time to prove it. Sarah's call came 2 days later. "I've got it," she said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "The transfer document. The signature is a damn good forgery, but a forensic analyst can tear it apart. And the notary public who stamped it? I ran his name. His license was suspended 6 months ago for falsifying affidavits in a real estate scam. He's a professional crook." "So we have them," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "We have the beginning," she corrected. "It gets worse. The property was transferred to a shell company. Ravencrest Holdings LLC. A name I'd never heard. Who owns it? There was a pause. The registered agent, the guy whose name is on all the incorporation documents, is your brother-in-law, Mark. Mark. Of course. My sister's perpetually unemployed husband, a man whose ambition was only outmatched by his laziness. He couldn't have masterminded this. He wasn't smart enough. He was a foot soldier, a pawn. Which meant someone else was the king. Something still gnawed at me. The complexity of it all, the forged signature, the crooked notary, the shell company, it seemed like too much firepower just to steal a house. I decided to do some recon. I drove to my grandfather's town and started watching the house from a distance. For a few days, nothing. Then, one night, my patience paid off. A plain black van, the kind used for commercial deliveries but with no logos, pulled into the driveway. Mark scurried out of the house to meet it. Under the dim porch light, I watched as they unloaded several heavy, wooden crates, carrying them not through the front door, but down the external steps to the basement. The next day, I went to see Ethan, the old mechanic who'd been my grandfather's friend for 50 years. He was a quiet, observant man. "Ethan, have you noticed anything strange at my grandpa's place?" I asked, leaning against a stack of tires in his garage. He grunted, not looking up from the engine he was working on. "Those vans," he said. "Been coming 2-3 times a week. Always late. No company name, no license plates I can see. Your sister's husband, he meets them. They're moving some heavy stuff into that basement. Using it like a warehouse. Power bill must be through the roof." His words confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't just about my inheritance. They were running a business out of my house. But what kind of business? The answer came that evening, in a text message from an unknown number. It was short, and it was brutal. "Walk away, or everyone finds out what the army shrinks at Walter Reed really think of you." My blood ran cold. My psychological evaluation. It wasn't a fully classified document, but the summaries were official, and in the wrong hands, they could be twisted into a weapon. They had breached a secure system to get that. This was an act of war. And it had the strategic, ruthless signature of only one person I knew. My father. I had to be sure. I had to hear it from him. I called my parents and, putting on a mask of normalcy, invited myself over for dinner. The meal was excruciating. My mother was a bundle of nerves, constantly dropping her fork and chattering about meaningless neighborhood gossip. My father, Richard, was the picture of calm. He asked about my retirement, my pension, feigning a fatherly interest that now seemed grotesque. He was a man playing a part, and he was a damn good actor. After dinner, I asked to speak with him in his study. I closed the heavy oak door, the sound echoing in the silent house. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I held up my phone, the threatening text glowing on the screen. "I got this last night," I said. My voice was level, but it was the calm of a sniper, not the calm of peace. He glanced at the screen. He didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He leaned back in his big leather chair, the one he always sat in like a throne, and steepled his fingers. The mask was gone. "I was hoping you'd be smart enough to take a hint, Emily." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. "You did this? You stole my home? You're threatening me?" "Don't be so dramatic," he said with a dismissive wave. "This is a family matter. Your sister and Mark, they needed a break. A foundation to build on. And you have your military pension, your savings. You're fine. That house was my inheritance. It was the only thing I ever asked for. And my service record, that's a federal crime, Dad." He actually chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Your service was useful to this country once, Emily, he said, his voice dropping to a cold, businesslike tone. Now it's useful to this family. This operation is bigger than you can imagine. It's providing for all of us. Don't stand in the way of your family's prosperity. You won't win. It was all there. The confirmation. The motive. The utter lack of remorse. He wasn't just a participant, he was the architect. The grief I felt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. I had dedicated my life to defending my country from enemies, foreign and domestic. I never imagined the most dangerous enemy I'd ever face would be my own father. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The daughter in me had died in that study. But the soldier had just been given a clear objective. Back in my motel room, the mind map I'd started was no longer a theory, it was a battle plan. This wasn't about a house anymore. This was about a criminal enterprise, and I was going to dismantle it, piece by piece. I knew my limits. I needed specialists. The next morning, I called Isaac Hayes, my former second-in-command, now a top-tier security consultant. I didn't ask for help, I stated my needs. Isaac, I have a situation. A domestic criminal conspiracy involving shell corporations, logistics, and a breach of military-adjacent data. I need a digital forensics analyst. The best you know. Someone off-book, vetted, and quiet. Isaac understood immediately. There was no judgment, just professional assessment. I have the perfect person, he said. Name's Kayla. Young, but she's a ghost in the machine. Wrote half the code the NSA uses for tracking. I'll make the introduction. 2 days later, the three of us, me, Sarah, and Kayla, met in Sarah's war room, a conference room plastered with white bards. Kayla, a woman in her late 20s with piercing eyes and a mind that moved at the speed of light, listened intently as we laid out every detail. When we were done, she simply nodded. Okay. The hacker is the weak link. People who brag are always sloppy. I'll start there. I'll need a list of all known associates of your brother-in-law. Social media, friends, family, anything you can dig up. For the next week, we worked around the clock. I became the mission coordinator, the same role I'd had in the army. Sarah prepared the legal onslaught, drafting injunctions and subpoenas. Kayla was our digital SEAL team, operating in the dark. The first break came after 3 days. Kayla called me on an encrypted line. Got him, she said, her voice electric with the thrill of the hunt. Kevin Fuller. Mark's cousin. An IT tech at a defense contractor. I tracked the IP address from the data breach back to his home router. The idiot used his gaming computer. He searched for your file, then 10 minutes later, logged into his World of Warcraft account from the same IP. He's a complete amateur. This was huge. We now had a direct link. I then used my own skills. Following Ethan's lead about the power bill, I legally accessed the public utility records for the house. The electricity consumption had tripled in the last 6 months, consistent with running heavy machinery 24/7. I cross-referenced the spike dates with the delivery times Ethan had given me. It was a perfect match. Kayla used the leverage on the hacker. With Isaac's help, they presented Kevin Fuller with a simple choice: become a witness for the federal government or face charges that would land him in prison for a decade. He crumbled in less than an hour. He gave us everything. He confessed that my father, Richard, had orchestrated the whole thing. Richard had discovered a loophole where the government was overpaying for certain electronic components. His plan was to buy cheap, foreign-made parts, repackage them in the basement of my grandfather's house, and sell them to the government through fraudulent contracts won by his shell company, Ravencrest. To make the company seem legitimate, he used my name, my reputation, and information from my stolen file. Kayla dug deeper, following the money. She created a masterpiece of digital forensics, a flowchart that mapped out the entire conspiracy. It showed the money leaving Department of Defense accounts, flowing into Ravencrest's bank, and then being funneled into 3 separate offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It was a perfect, self-contained portrait of their greed. Sarah filed the emergency injunction. As predicted, my family's assets were frozen. They were trapped. Their only move was to fight it in court, to argue that I was a liar, that their business was legitimate. They walked right into our trap. The day of the hearing was surreal. My family sat at their table, radiating a smug confidence. They truly believed they were untouchable. Their lawyer, a slick man with a plastic smile, stood and began his opening statement. He painted me as a disgruntled, unstable veteran, suffering from PTSD, jealous of my sister's perfect life. He twisted my years of dedicated service into a character flaw, suggesting I was a rigid, damaged individual, unable to cope with civilian life. It was disgusting, and I could feel the jury's eyes on me, filled with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Vanessa's testimony was a masterclass in manipulation, full of tears and feigned hurt. She ended with her dramatic, rehearsed line, "She's just a homeless veteran with a grudge." Then, it was my turn. Sarah walked me through it, step by step. We built our case, brick by brick. First, the forged deed and the testimony from the notary board. I saw my father shift in his seat, his confidence wavering for the first time. Next, the hacker. Sarah presented Kevin Fuller's sworn affidavit. "Your Honor, we have here a signed confession, admitting that Mr. Mark Thompson paid him to illegally access Colonel Harrington's service records." "That's a lie!" Mark shouted, jumping to his feet before his lawyer could stop him. The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Thompson, or I'll have you removed for contempt." Mark sank back into his chair, his face pale. Finally, Sarah looked at me. "Colonel, do you have anything further to present to the court?" "I do, Your Honor," I said. I stood and walked to the clerk's table, retrieving the slim file folder we had prepared. I approached the bench, the sound of my sensible shoes echoing in the silent courtroom. "This, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and strong, "is a forensic analysis of a criminal enterprise. The blue lines you see here represent money being transferred from the U.S. Treasury into the accounts of Ravencrest Holdings. The red lines show that same money being funneled into 3 offshore accounts. This chart also shows the metadata from the fraudulent supply contracts, which were all submitted from a single IP address, registered to the home office of the man sitting right there, my father, Richard Harrington." I opened the folder for him. Inside was Kayla's flowchart and the signed confession from the hacker. The judge read it. His face was a study in controlled fury. He looked from the papers to my father, who now seemed to have shrunk in his expensive suit. He looked at my weeping mother, and at Vanessa, who was staring into space, her jaw slack with shock. The judge cleared his throat. He looked at the bailiff standing by the door. "Bailiff," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "secure this courtroom. No one leaves this room. I am placing a call to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Right now." The courtroom erupted. My mother shrieked. But it was the sight of the doors opening that sealed their fate. It wasn't local police. It was 2 federal agents in dark suits. They moved with a quiet purpose that I recognized instantly. They bypassed everyone else and walked directly to my family's table. As a federal agent gently but firmly put my father in handcuffs, he was led past me. He stopped, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "Why?" he hissed, his voice cracking. "I'm your father." I met his gaze, and for the first time, I felt nothing but a cold, clear emptiness where my love for him used to be. "Honor," I said, my voice just loud enough for him to hear. "It's the one thing you don't let anyone steal from you." I turned my back on him and walked out of the courtroom. 3 months later, I was back in my grandfather's workshop, the scent of fresh-cut pine in the air. The house was mine, scrubbed clean of their presence and their crimes. The news of their sentencing had been a brief, distant report. Richard, 8 years in federal prison. Mark, 10. Vanessa, 6. It was justice, but it wasn't a victory. It was just an ending. The real victory was the peace I felt now. It was in the quiet mornings on the porch, in the satisfaction of fixing a loose floorboard, in rebuilding what they had tried to destroy. Ethan had stopped by to help me fix the old furnace, shaking his head and muttering, "Good people win out. Sometimes it just takes a while." One afternoon, an email arrived from Isaac. The Department of Veterans Affairs was creating a new task force to help veterans who had been targeted by fraud. They wanted an advisor. They wanted me. I looked at the mantelpiece, where my grandfather's service medal sat polished and proud. I thought of all the other soldiers, sailors, and airmen out there, people who had served with honor, who were vulnerable to the kind of predators my own family had become. A new mission. A new way to protect the flock. I took out my own medal and placed it right next to his. 2 generations. 1 foundation. My name is Emily Harrington, and my new life was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a difficult journey, but one that taught me so much about strength and what's truly worth fighting for. I'm curious, have you or anyone you know ever had to stand up to family to do what's right? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more. It really helps the channel out. Thank you.